Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much for attending Scale Ireland's annual autumn gathering, or at least it will be into the future. Scale Ireland is an independent, not for profit organisation that represents Indigenous tech startup and scale up companies and was set up just 3 years ago. My name is Martina Fitzgerald, and I'm the CEO of Scale Ireland. Now, when I say that we've just set up in less than 3 years, just to put it in perspective, late last May, we launched our membership model for the first time. And I'm really proud to say that it is growing, our community is growing and at a pace. And I'm so delighted to see such a terrific turnout today for our first in-person event. It's actually the first time we've had an opportunity since we were set up to hold an event like this. So thank you all for coming here today. And on that point, the auditorium is full today. We actually turned people down. Maybe the weather had an impact this morning, but we could have filled a second auditorium if we had wanted to. Such was the response from our members. And I think that's a really good signal going forward. Now, fittingly, to mark the occasion, we are delighted to be joined today by the Minister for Finance and the President of the Eurogroup, Paschal Donohoe. You are very welcome, Minister, and give him a warm welcome, please.
Thank you very much.
And we are also joined today by some leading founders and investors. We have Jack Pierce, the co-founder of Wayflyer, Orlaith, the co-founder of Shorla, Oncology, and Matthew Coffey, the co-founder of Squid Loyalty. And we'll also be joined by two leading investors, Prendergast, the general manager of Frontline Ventures, and also Faye is over there. She's also the general partner of WakeUp Capital. So will you please give them all a warm welcome. And I think you'll admit it is a very impressive lineup. And the Minister, thank you very much because you're going to stay for some of the key discussions with our two panels and contribute and give your feedback to what's happening. I should also point out that we do have an online audience as well watching in from home and in a dry place. And we do have a hashtag today. It's very simple, hashtag Scale Ireland Forum. So you are welcome whether you're here or online. Now, of course, this event is very timely because it comes just 2 weeks out from the budget, which is occupying the minister's mind, I'd imagine, lots of questions about that. But it's also coming at a really critical juncture for Ireland Inc. because the government is formulating a new policy, a white paper on enterprise policy. And it is vital that the Indigenous tech sector is centre stage to our economic future planning, and that it has the sector and it will continue to play a pivotal role in terms of enterprise, employment, exports, growth, and also that has to be centre stage in that new white paper. And I'm sure the Minister will have plenty to say about that. Now, shortly, I'm going to hand over to Brian Coffey, who many of you will know, and he is the chair of Scale Ireland. Then we're going to have two panel discussions, first with our founders and then with our investors. But first, we really do want to pay tribute and also to thank our host today, Andy Cronin of Avolon, because Avolon supported Scale Ireland from the very beginning. And that's because Andy, who is the founder and a CEO designate of Avolon, he and Donald Slattery, who's the CEO, they have believed in startups and scale-ups and also this sector and have believed in Scale Ireland and what we were trying to achieve. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Andy to come up. So if you give him a warm welcome him to this part of the speech.
Thanks, Martina. And first of all, welcome to the office. And Minister, we'd like to extend our welcome to you. It's great to have you here. This event was originally planned for about 3 years ago, actually. So it's been a long time in the making. It's great to finally have it started and here in person. I know you're not here to see me, so I'm going to keep this crushingly short and brief. We, Avolon, pride ourselves, and actually, for those of you who don't know our history, we were a startup. We didn't start out in a large office building with a 300-seat auditorium. For those of you who are familiar with the area, there's a pub, Mary Mac's, just on the corner of Shelburne Road at the traffic lights. And there's a table at the back of Mary Max, and that was the scene of the creation of the business plan for Avolon, which was a collection of friends who came together, and we came together without an ambition to radically disrupt or create new technology. What we wanted to do was incrementally improve a business model compared to the competition that was in the sector at the time, do something a little bit different, and use the opportunity, as we saw it, of the Great Recession, the financial crisis, to use that as a springboard to catapult the scale into the business to what is today, depending on who measures or who's talking, either number 2 or number 3 globally in what we do with a $35 billion balance sheet. We've always admired and respected people like you in this room, founders, innovators, entrepreneurs, people who go emotionally all in. And we know ourselves that when you go all in on a project, the highs are higher, the lows are lower. We've done what we can to support entrepreneurship and innovation in Ireland. Pre-COVID, we launched Project I, which was a white paper talking about innovation in Ireland, followed that up with Accelerate I. And then in July this year, the most tangible activity that we've done is a venture called Innovate for Ireland, with the strong support of the government. Ourselves, AIB, and the Irish government are making a large capital commitment to fund the development of PhD research in Ireland to drive the kind of innovation that we think this country is capable of. And I'd like to just call out Professor Brí McCraw, previously the head of DCU, who has been at the forefront of making that a reality. So with that, I will stop talking. I will hand you over to Brian, I believe, and wish you all the very best, both in your ventures, but also hope you enjoyed the day here, and great to have you in the office. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Andy. And, you know, I just want to pay a personal tribute to yourself and to Donohoe and to Avolon, because when we were starting Scale Ireland, you were literally one of the first supporters to come on board with a long-term commitment, which was enormously helpful to us. And indeed, as I mentioned, there was pressure from day one to use these fantastic facilities. Sadly, the pandemic intervened, and this is the first occasion that we've actually been able to host an event here. But thank you very much for your support, and we look forward to continuing to work with you and the team. We're holding today's event at a time when the government is reviewing a number of key, very, very important state supports for entrepreneurs and for founders, including the R&D tax credit and the Keep Share option scheme. We've had very positive engagement with the Minister and his department on these key issues, and we're hopeful that we're going to see some positive reform on both fronts in the budget. And as always, I would encourage the Minister to be radical in his approach, in particular in relation to the Keep Share option scheme, which has the wonderful benefit of being cost-free in the short term from a government perspective, but also is potentially hugely impactful in the longer term. Last year, we very much welcomed the Minister's decision to make key changes to the Employment Investment Incentive Scheme, and also the announcement of the new €90 million Innovation Equity Fund for early stage companies, comprising Enterprise Ireland, the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund, and the European Investment Fund. I think given the international investment climate that we're entering now, that's going to prove to be a hugely important support for early stage companies in Ireland at a time when other funding is potentially drying up. We're also very supportive of the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund's new strategy, which prioritizes scaling companies and identifying companies where ISIF can really play a transformative role. I think that's going to be important in an investment landscape that is otherwise a little bleak, perhaps. So we greatly appreciate the opportunity to discuss these pressing issues for our members with the Minister here today. So please give a warm round of applause to the Minister for Finance and President of the Eurogroup, Paschal Donohoe, who will now deliver his keynote address.
So good afternoon, everybody, and it is fantastic to have the opportunity to join you all for this really important Scale Ireland event. It's really wonderful to be in this beautiful building and beautiful auditorium. This is the only outing and excursion from my office I'm going to have between now and budget day, so I plan to enjoy every moment of it. But I'm particularly grateful and particularly pleased to be here with Martina and Brian for this event. And I want to pay both of them great tribute for the work that they have done in representing this sector and your work to the government over the last number of years. The work that both of them have done has had real impact on my thinking. This is a sector that I really value. I believe the work that you do is one of the really important strands of the resilience and the future of the Irish economy, and I really value that. And I've shown that in the decisions that I've made over the last number of years. But making those decisions is a clearer thing to do when you receive clear and data-backed guidance and advice. And that is what has been done by the Scale Ireland team and has been done very effectively by Martina and Brian, which is why when I was picking what will be my one outing between now and budget day, I said I would come here to be with you all. I want to also really recognise and thank Andy and thank Avolon for the immense contribution that they're making, not only to our economy. You'll all know in the company that we are here with this afternoon, they now are leading and representing a sector that has a 65% share overall of the global aviation leasing sector for the world. It's extraordinary. And this is a Irish leadership, Irish innovation, and Irish grit that has ensured that we have a cluster of Irish and global companies that are based here that are literally leading the world. So that is an extraordinary achievement by Andy and by Donald and by all of the team here, which makes the holding of this event in this particular company and in this location particularly appropriate. And I'd also like to welcome the leadership role that they and that Breen has played in launching Innovate for Ireland. This is a new way of thinking about how we can develop research and development and innovative thinking here within our academic community in Ireland, and use that as a launch pad for further economic development for our country in the years ahead. And the government has been very pleased to recognise the scale of this initiative and its originality in our support and our funding for this work, which I think will be the source of even more bigger and better ideas in the time to come. So what I'd like to do in the few moments that are available to me is I want to say three things to you. The first one is I want to give a little bit of context for the budget that I'm currently working on and how that fits into where Ireland stands and where Europe stands. Secondly, I want to just emphasize the importance of the technology-based startups that we're recognizing in the work of Scale Ireland, and also for the importance of scaling up these businesses to the Irish economy. And then thirdly, I want to touch on how the government and myself have supported this work in the last number of years in decisions that we have made, and to give the commitment that we'll continue to take on board the feedback and ideas that we hear from your sector if, though, you'll understand I can't give any indication regarding what I will or will not do. So if I just begin with where we stand economically, both for Ireland, for Europe at the moment, it is a moment of real reflection that as we've overcome challenge from challenge, just as we had overcome a moment in which the pandemic posed such a challenge to us for so long, we found ourselves confronting yet again a security and economic challenge that was beyond the control and influence of Ireland. We stand a number of months into dealing with, and I'll only acknowledge, the economic consequences of the war on the people of Ukraine. We're all aware, as searing and as difficult as those economic consequences are, you do have to put them in the context of the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians that are fleeing their homes due to the invasion that has been inflicted upon them, and also the tragic loss of life that is happening in that country at the moment. But nonetheless, the economic change and what that means for our fortunes is considerable and has to be taken into account in the planning for this budget and in other decisions that we've made. As is now well known to all of you, we are at a point that just as we were dealing with the economic consequences of once-in-a-generation pandemic, we are now dealing with how a war has exacerbated some of those consequences to them and added an additional amount of risk and uncertainty. What we are seeing happening in energy prices, what that means for the rise in inflation, and what that means for an inflationary trend that is increasingly becoming more broad-based than just inflation, is clearly the next challenge that the government and the people of Ireland have to respond to. All that being said, it is worth emphasising that we are approaching this latest set of challenges with economic foundations that had really recovered from the darkest days of our pandemic. I remember vividly moments sitting in the Department of Finance when we had 630,000 people who had become unemployed, albeit with additional support from the state, as they needed it and they deserved every bit of it. I remember those moments in which we were looking at the sharpest economic contraction in developed economies in not only recent history, but in modern economic history. And if you look at those moments now, less than 2 years ago to where we are now is 2.55 million people at work in Ireland after a moment in which we were confronting an extraordinary unemployment shock. And now in a moment from when I believed we would be borrowing tens of billions of euros to support the response back to the pandemic. We did borrow it, but we now find ourselves in a position of exchequer finances that are back in surplus and actually an overall debt situation for our country that's remarkably close to where we were before the pandemic hit. So these are foundations that on a national level have proved their worth. And indeed, at a European level, we now within the euro area have a record low level of unemployment, with many, many economies within the euro area now show a recovery in their public finances that is important and alas will indeed be needed. So it is for all of those reasons that this will be a budget that will be about how we respond to a cost of living challenge, and a great challenge that is now beyond where we were in the summer, that it was primarily a household issue, to one that has been felt in households and businesses the length and breadth of Ireland, while at the same time needing to get the balance right between maintaining our resilience and getting ready for other challenges that may be around the corner, but also other opportunities that could be around the corner that Ireland needs to avail of. Which is why, which brings me to my second point, why this meeting and why this discussion is so important. Because I'm absolutely clear that in the time ahead, a really important pillar in the economic model to help Ireland respond back to the change that is coming will be how we can not only have a vibrant and dynamic enterprise sector, and one that is capable of growing and scaling up, but also one that gets the support that by scaling up builds the resilience of our economy in the years ahead, and also builds the number of different forms of employment and diversity of employment that our economy will need. As I look at all of that, our membership of the European Union, our membership of the single market is going to be more important than ever. Because what that will give, and I'm seeing increasing signs of it elsewhere in the European Union, is a single market that we have the continued ability to export our goods and services in, and to provide a space within which that scaling up can be accelerated with the right domestic supports in place. And we're going to need to continue to do this better and better in the time ahead. One of the reasons for that is to go back to the point I made a moment ago, is we are in the very early days, I believe, of very considerable regime change within national and European economies. On an overall level, we are going to evolve from economies that had an environment of very low inflation and very, very low interest rates to, at least for a time, higher inflation than we are used to, with interest rates that are clearly changing. So that regime within which entrepreneurship and capital allocation was based is changing. And the other secular change that was coming anyway, but is about to be hyper accelerated, is the twin transitions in the European economy to a more digital and lower carbon future. And in particular, that lower carbon future now has a security dimension to it that it didn't have before the war on Ukraine. So countries, enterprises, entrepreneurs who are on the right side of those two transitions have the ability not only to create benefits and reward for themselves and to fulfill their dreams and their aspirations, but countries who are on the right side of those twin changes also have a unique opportunity to preserve and build living standards in a world that has become so much more volatile, and in which the frequency and the impact of disruption is set to grow. So that leads on to my final and concluding point. For me, this isn't just about words. It isn't about just signaling support. I also do want to make the case, and Brian has already acknowledged this, for the work that we have done over the last 2 years, which Brian and Martina had a big influence on because of the points that they were making. If you now look at the level of change that we made with regard to the EIS scheme, a really important scheme to help fund and support and provide capital and equity to startups and to growth of startups. The change that I made in the recent finance bill is a sign of the recognition that I have for the work that you do. Similarly, where we are now with the launch of our multi-supported Irish Innovation Seed Fund. And I say multi-supported because we had so many different state agencies come together to support that fund, and so many European bodies that came together, from the European Investment Bank, just to name one, to all of the work that happened here from Enterprise Ireland, and I see Leo Crawford here, just want to thank him for his work in that, to provide 90 million euro worth of funding for early stage startups who wouldn't normally be in a position to gain that kind of support. And then finally, the work that happened with the continued change of the mandate for ISIF so that they can play a role in a new and broader startup economy are all clear indications from the government of our recognition of the value of what you are doing and our commitment to providing new economic tools and supports to help you grow, because your growth has real value, not just for you, but also for our country, our society, and our economy at large. That then leads into the work that I'm doing in preparation for the budget. Brian has touched on a number of areas that are important to the future of our economy in the years ahead, whether it's the research, the R&D credit, whether it's the future of KEEP. These are all matters that are under consideration, but I hope you won't be surprised if I disappoint you by saying you'll just have to wait for another 2 weeks as we conclude our work in those areas. So I'll just go back to where I began my few words. The work that you do, the economic growth, the employment, the investment, the tax revenue that you yield to our state is really, really valuable. It's something the government deeply values. And what I want to do, and the Department of Finance will continue to do, is to collaborate with you to look at how we can have balanced economic supports in place to help your work go farther and further, because it is work that will be a really important part of a resilient Irish economy in the years ahead. And while the challenges and difficulties are always uppermost, I do want to end on a note of optimism. If I look at what we have overcome, if I look at the progress that we have made in recent years, even though some of the challenges feel particularly wearing and particularly intense at the moment, I have absolutely no doubt that we will overcome them. And I'm certain that in the time ahead, we will get to a brighter, better, and safer place than some are experiencing at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for attending here today and for your comments here today, but also thank you for your engagement and your officials' engagement as well, which are not in public, but as part of the SME forum and everything else. So thank you. Now we're going to move along and we're going to start talking to our founders. And we have today founders of organizations of startups of 3 different sizes and also in different sectors. And they're a good example of just the potential of this dynamic sector. Now, Brian will be talking in a little while to 2 investors, and then the Minister will be contributing and giving his feedback to what they have to say, because it is important to hear from the founders. Now, I would love to introduce you this morning to our 3 founders, starting off Jack Pierce, the co-founder and chief financial officer of Wayflyer, whom you all know, which offers funding to e-commerce businesses, including startups and companies that want to scale rapidly. Now, Wayflyer, which employs 500 people, became one of Ireland's tech unicorns earlier this year after raising 150 million. And the company is now valued, would you like to say it?
We still can't afford our own auditorium, so that's the most important thing.
Okay, it is valued at $1.6 billion. So you're very welcome here, Jack, today. We're also joined by Orla Ryan, who is the co-founder and chief technical officer of Shorla Oncology, which is based in Clonmel in County Tipperary and also in Cambridge in Massachusetts in America. And it is an oncology pharmaceutical company that develops innovative therapies to cancer patients with unmet needs. And Shorla has raised over 10 million euro to date, and it is preparing to launch its first leukemia treatment in the US. So you're very welcome, Orla. Congratulations on all your success. And finally, to the early stage representative, we are delighted to welcome here Matthew Coffey, who is the co-founder and CEO of Squid Loyalty, which you can't escape anywhere at the moment. It helps businesses build stronger connections with their customers and increase loyalty with their brands. And customers who use Squid in terms of their purchases and their engagement, they increase that 3-fold. And as a result, Squid is operating with 1,100 retail businesses across Ireland, the UK, and Australia. So well done, Matthew. Now, I'm going to start off with you, Jack. Phenomenal success. And also, you were in the news again a week or 2 ago because you have secured over 250 million in debt finance to help you grow even further. And that's on the back of securing 300 million earlier at the beginning of the year. So you obviously have very ambitious plans and are very confident about them. Can you tell us about Wayflyer's plans?
When money is your product, unfortunately, you need to keep raising money. So yeah, I think we'll be doing that for a long, long time. Next year ahead, main thing for us is to expand the business a little bit beyond financing and try and do more for our customers, and that's really the main goal. How do we develop 2 or 3 more products and launch them into the market? So that's the main thing.
And you have seen of competition. There was another operator here, an international. They're no longer operating here in Europe. So you have a major place in the market.
Yeah, I think anytime you're in the financing industry, you have to deal with people not paying you back, losses, all these type of things. And as the economy has turned downwards, people who maybe didn't put such a importance on underwriting and other things like that have struggled a little bit more. For us personally, it's probably a good thing, but probably not allowed to say much more than that.
And can I ask you, where would you be most confident in terms of growing your business, or where do you see opportunity?
Sure. So our business is split. It's about 65% in the US. There's about 15% in the UK. And then outside of that, it's split between like Germany, France, a bunch of other European countries, and Australia. The US is the mammoth, and it will continue to be the mammoth for a long, long time. So in terms of like funding and that side of it, that will be our main place where we finance businesses. At the end of the day, though, most of our employees are here. All of our tech people are here. All of our tech people either here or moved to London, just trying to get away from Dublin for a little while. But yeah, everyone's based here pretty much. So
and that's
good.
important to you, isn't it?
It is. We've great people here in Ireland. Probably goes back to having such great tech companies around, whether it's your Googles and Facebooks. You can hire sales teams straight off the bat that know exactly what they're doing. You've been trading in it. So it's been a huge help to us today, I'd say.
Now, I do want to bring you back because 3 years ago, which you reminded me about, 3 years ago, you were operating in a basement office and there were 3 of you in Marion Square. Like, it has been phenomenal.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a whirlwind for sure. I still remember we moved, so we're now on Bagot Street. I still remember we got to about 15 people in the basement, and then it got a little bit too small for us. And I remember us walking around the corner with all our screens and laptops and everything. But yeah, it's been a fun journey.
And before I move on to Orlaith, can I ask you, why do you think Wayflyer has been so successful to other startups that started at that time in your own area and others? What would you identify? It's a huge question, but why?
Selling money is a pretty good thing to sell, to be honest with you. So yeah, that's what I put down to.
Okay. Modest and to the point. Okay, Orlaith, yourself, can you tell us more about Shorla Oncology, because it is operating in a critically important medical space, and also you're launching your first treatment in the US. So it's a very important time for your company and your expansion plans.
Absolutely, Martina. Having co-founded the company with Sharon Cunningham in 2018, we now have actually 3 products at an advanced stage, the first pending US FDA approval. We expect to launch that early next year. So we are building our own commercialization infrastructure because we plan to launch in Shorla's name. Sharon relocated to Cambridge, Massachusetts last year, and we are very excited about the prospect of having a product on market. That being said, all of the R&D pipeline ideation is centered here in Ireland, and we have a fantastic team where we want to replicate and grow and add more products to our pipeline. Once we do realize our approval in US, we will take it to other global markets.
So the next year is critical for your company.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It certainly is.
And given your global expansion plans, because you're thinking beyond America, you still want to, like Jack, stay headquartered here, and yours is in Clonmel.
Absolutely, proudly so. We've gotten fantastic support to start and grow the company. There is a fantastic talent pool from a scientific perspective, particularly in the Southeast, and the cluster of companies there. And I suppose operating in US now as well as Ireland, relatively speaking, Ireland is much more cost effective to operate here. So we will absolutely grow here.
And Matthew, can you tell us about Squid Loyalty and the breadth, I suppose, of your retail and customer base? For those who are not familiar with you, I don't know how you can't escape you in any retail outlet.
Yeah, sure. So Squid basically builds customized loyalty schemes for different brands with marketing and analytics. And then we put all their loyalty cards into the one app for ease of engagement. So if you think about loyalty schemes, they're proven to be the most cost-effective way of increasing revenue. But the average loyalty scheme, 60% of people stop using them after sign up. So basically they suffer from poor engagement. And the reason for that primarily is that most loyalty schemes are built by businesses for businesses, as opposed to for the end user, which is a consumer. So we've flipped the thinking, and with Squid, we've actually prioritized the consumer in our designs. And when you talk to consumers, they'll say they don't like carrying around too many cards. Loyalty schemes are just too clunky and awkward to interact with. And so what we've done is we've scrapped the initial sign up, and basically we've put all the cards in one place. And then from then we've made it that every interaction is just a single tap to sign up to a new scheme, to collect a stamp, or to redeem a reward, basically. And the good news is that it really works. So people are, it does, which is good to see, because it's handy. But people are using Squid 3 times more often than they would their previous loyalty scheme, which is basically just meaning more transactions more often for different businesses. So we started off with stamp cards in coffee shops, barbers, that kind of thing. But now we're expanding into point-based schemes. And so we're talking with different payment companies. And now we're in, as you were saying, over 1,100 businesses. We're in about 40% of Irish coffee shops. But with these payment integrations, we'll soon be able to serve the entire retail market, basically.
Okay, so you do have ambitious expansion plans, and you're also, we should note, currently raising a seed round to internationalize your operations further. So I suppose, can you tell us about that? And you also want to enhance your partnerships with some payment companies, and I know you have a strategic partnership with one, and I'm looking at Stripe there. Can you tell us more about your future plans?
Yeah, so with the fundraising, I mean, one of the main reasons is to avail of the future growth. So in the last 2 years, we've grown more than 10x, and we have an increasing inbound rate from Ireland and abroad, which is a good kind of sign of product market fit. So it's a good time to scale. So we've put a lot of work into our processes and sales metrics, basically, to make it possible to do the next 10x in growth. And so by the time we hit our Series A round, we plan to have grown 10x, be in 10,000 sites with a good raise. But I suppose the primary reason for the raise is to build out our product roadmap. So we've talked with a lot of payment companies, and they basically recognize the potential of a loyalty scheme that has high engagement, that works, I suppose, basically, and that together we could make it easier for a consumer to engage and interact with loyalty systems, and also increase the total addressable market. So we've recently just been joined by a new CTO, Thomas Brady, who's a previous founder. He's proven attraction, basically, in delivering products to millions and millions of users. So yeah, that's kind of the next part, basically, is to build out the product roadmap, flesh out the marketing, and then move into payments.
Great, and you now have your new catchphrase, it works.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, Jack, now we're going to return to all the founders and ask them what they would identify is some of the key issues or challenges, maybe that their own company has experienced or the sector as a whole. And I'm going to start with you, Jack, because I know that you have a number of issues on a number of fronts. We have limited time, but I think we would like to hear what each of you all have to think, what Orla has to think in a different space as well, and Matthew. But what are your experiences, or what do you think are issues that need to be tackled?
Yeah, so like for us, we're 500 people here now, and 350 of them here in Dublin. The way option schemes are taxed, I think, could probably be worked on. That's probably the biggest thing for us that I look at. In the UK, it's just much more favourable. So even taking a lead from them would probably make a lot of sense. But at the end of the day, most of these people who work for us, they'll probably go on to start their own businesses. I worked for another entrepreneur for 2 years, went on to start my own business. I hope, like, one of my biggest aims is to have a lot of entrepreneurs come out of Wayflyer in years to come. And so having a 52% tax rate on all the money they make that they probably invest back into the economy over the next few years, hiring people, just doesn't feel like it makes a whole lot of sense. It's probably something that could be worked on. Yeah.
And in general, would you find the recruitment or retention of staff is an issue, or how is Wayflyer, coping in that front? Because that is an issue for many startups here who have to compete with bigger companies or with other jurisdictions with more favorable conditions.
Yeah, sure. So we've probably been lucky in that it's been a whirlwind of a few years. I'm from Dublin. My brother's from Dublin. We know a lot of people around, so hiring staff hasn't been the hardest thing in the entire world. But that's probably limited a little bit to ourselves compared to everyone else. So I wouldn't put it down. I wouldn't put that down to it, but just think that, turning around and putting an income tax rate on people who've joined the company in day one down in the basement on Marion Square, as you said, just doesn't feel like the right way to treat it. And if we can figure something else out, that would be good.
Okay. And is there any other issues, that is the main issue you'd identify?
That's the main thing for us. I mean, we probably would have gone through, remember we tried the Keep scheme. My cousin's up there, he works in Maples, his partner in Maples, and I think we spent a while talking to Maples trying to figure out the old Keep scheme. So having just admin burden around it is probably a lot. It's not the most straightforward scheme in the entire world. Beyond that, just admin burden around raising money from just generally like Enterprise Ireland even. It's an amazing company, but just how much paperwork you have to do feels overloaded a little bit at times. And so that's something that could be worked on as well.
And we should point out Leo Clancy, as the Minister said, is here today to support, and so is representatives from ISAF, James and Georgina. And perhaps you could talk to Leo into the future about how you could reduce that paperwork, because it's solution probably. Okay.
I remember getting asked to do, I think it was 5-year projections, and I turned around and said, I don't know what I'm going to do in about 3 months, so never mind.
Okay.
That kind of thing.
Okay. And Orla, what about yourself? What would you identify as the main challenges for either your company or the sector as a whole?
Yeah, so funding is always a challenge, for a company trying to grow. The pharmaceutical sector is a particularly expensive sector to operate within, and we know well as we're about to embark on our Series B. What I will say is we've gotten great support from Enterprise Ireland and have utilised as many state supports as possible. The R&D tax credits is very important to us, and when we can realise it, it would be great, I suppose, if we could realise that sooner. And also the complexity of the process. Sharon and I worked for a previous Irish startup and had a lot of experience utilising it, but I could see how it would be cumbersome for a company who are trying to work on all other angles to grow the business and try and navigate that as well. So that would be the recommendation from that perspective.
And I think that's a point that Jack has hit on as well, the administrative burden, and for startups that have such limited resources, they don't all have relations in Maples. But it is difficult, and sometimes one tech unicorn founder, I think Brian has told us many times, he made it a decision between filling in those forms and going for the state supports or growing the market, and he went for growing the market. Matthew, what would you identify as the key issue?
Yeah, hiring and recruiting is definitely a challenge at an early stage, particularly software developers. I think it is great that there's so much opportunity in Ireland, and so it always feels like there is a deficit of developers. And so when you're competing with bigger companies that have more liquidity, you need to get a bit creative, I suppose, and look at things like the Keep scheme, etc., to incentivize people in. And then I suppose, secondly, again, to kind of echo what the guys have been saying, but fundraising, and for us, the good thing has been there's a lot of interest, I suppose, but when you're looking at angel investors and the likes, it's quite hard to do the admin on particularly safe, simple agreement for future equity. Don't qualify for EIS at the minute, so the more the interest, the bigger the administrative burden, basically, which is just a distraction from pushing on the business, I suppose.
Okay, and to be fair, the EIS was reformed. There were some changes to broaden out the type of investment vehicles last year. One of the key issues we've always identified, Minister, is the administrative burden behind it. The guidance document from Revenue is 101 pages. I think we will, get your feedback, Minister. What you've heard, 3 families, 3 different companies, 3 different sizes, 3 different sectors. What would you like? We'd like to get your contribution to what they've raised.
Thank you. So firstly, to hear the contributions that were made there by the three of you are another reason why it's right to be optimistic about the future of Ireland and Europe. It is very easy at the moment when we see such tales of difficulty, and we've come through so much over recent years, to look out into the years ahead in a more pessimistic or uncertain way. That's not an outlook I buy into, but if I ever needed a reminder of why it's right to look forward to the future with certainty and confidence, it's the three of you, and many are all who are here today. So thank you all for that contribution that you make. Secondly, I do sense a theme in the feedback emerging there. I'm sure it happened organically, but I can sense it. So I do hear the point. So how could I not? So of course I will consider it. But I do need to make the case overall for the benefits and value of everything else that we have. We have an excellent R&D tax credit. We have stability regarding corporate tax and the future of it, and a rate that I've put an incredible amount of my time and life into preserving and protecting and making the case for, to the extent that, and a number of you are going to cross this threshold anyway, and congratulations to you when you do it. But if you're less than 715 million euro global turnover, you have a 12.5% tax rate. Above that, it's 15, or will be 15, but at that 15, it'll still be one of the lowest in the European Union. So I do hear the feedback in relation to that particular change, but the strength of Enterprise Ireland, the benefits of many other things in our tax code, and their clarity and competitiveness are also things of value as well that make a gigantic difference. So I'll certainly take on board, though, the point that has been made, which does remind me that I got my Clancy's and my Crawfords mixed up. Apologies, Leo. I do apologize to you for that when I was mentioning you earlier on. But then just to go back to the other common theme that I heard in the three contributions there, which is a reminder of the value of the technology universe that we already have located in Ireland. It's well beyond an ecosystem now. The scale of employer, the diversity of talent and expertise that is already located here is an extraordinary reservoir for the entrepreneurship and economic activity that's yet to come. And if you look at, for example, the global leadership that Andy and a few of his peers have in aviation leasing, that's a cluster that comes back in part to one company and one location that was here in Ireland in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, which is GPA and Shannon. And much of what has now happened in that sector, in your sector, though not all, because it's taken brilliant people to move it to this level, can be traced back to there. But similarly, horse breeding, what's happened, little corner in Tipperary, and now we're a global leader in that. So they are clusters that reshaped Ireland, which makes you think what we could yet achieve when you think of the scale of the cluster that all of you are now building upon, which is why your input into our economic policy is very important.
And was there anything, before I hand over to Brian and we change to our second panel, was there anything that struck you from their personal stories, Minister, or I know that you are committed to this sector, but was there anything that struck you, because there's three young entrepreneurs, and that comes with risks as well as ambition?
It does. It's a very common story that I hear when I meet entrepreneurs in all parts of our economy. It is a reminder of the risk that so many have to endure, and while so many do benefit, while some benefit from reward, the risk and the work for many is just phenomenal. And what I'm reminded of when I hear those three contributions there is just the grit and commitment that you have to put in to get anywhere with your ideas. It's remarkable, which is why we have many parts of our economy that are designed ultimately to try to support your work. I mean, the fact that Enterprise Ireland and people like Leo are amongst the best in the world at what they do isn't luck. It happens because we have people like Leo and successive governments have supported an organization like EI. And the reason we have to do it is that we have a duty to do it when we have talents such as are here. But what is very encouraging for me is while I'm here at a Tech and Scale Ireland event, which I'm delighted to be at, what's amazing is when I go to all parts of our economy, how common I see that quality. And that is why ultimately I believe our outlook should be one of optimism and determination to realize that optimism.
Thank you, Minister. And at this point, and thank you to Jack, to Orla, and to Matthew. And at this point, we're going to ask you to move to the front row. There's going to be a changeover of those microphones. Jack is moving very quickly. And we're going to bring on our second panel. And I'm going to hand over to Brian now, who's going to introduce the investor panel. Just to make the point, those who are standing, there are spaces here at the front or to the side if you want to move down. Brian.
Thank you, Martina. The Irish Venture Capital Association's figures for the second quarter, which were actually just published this morning, are actually surprisingly solid given the kind of global investment climate that we operate in. And that is obviously very encouraging. But it is a pretty turbulent environment, and when you dig down into the figures, there are a couple of, shall we say, worrying trends. The first is that the number of early stage companies being financed declined quite significantly. Not just one or two, but tens of companies fewer were getting financed in this quarter than the equivalent quarter a year ago. And in addition, there was a very significant drop in the amount of international capital being invested in Irish companies. And as you know, Ireland is a small economy. We need that international capital, but we can't completely rely on it. We also need to ensure that there are indigenous sources of capital to support our growing companies. So it's a very important time to get a read on the investment landscape. So I'm delighted to be joined by Will Prendergast, who is the co-founder and general partner at Frontline Ventures. Frontline are a Dublin headquartered VC firm which focuses on globally ambitious B2B companies on both sides of the Atlantic. And over the last 10 years, Frontline has invested in over 100 high growth technology companies in Europe and the US. Will focuses on software companies at seed and Series A, and during his career has led the first rounds of investment in Irish companies like AMCS, Brightbill, BoxEver, and Pointy. And I see Mark Cummins here. Congratulations to you both on the exit to Google. A fantastic achievement. Mark has actually sold 2 companies to Google, which is some track record, and is part of our board in Scale Ireland. So thank you, Mark. I'm also joined by Faye, Walsh, Drouillard, the co-founder and general partner of WakeUp Capital. WakeUp Capital are an impact-focused venture fund investing in sustainable and inclusive early-stage companies, both in Ireland and elsewhere. Faye backs visionary founders tackling complex social and environmental challenges in areas such as sustainable food and agriculture systems, health equity, and an inclusive economy. So welcome both. I might start with you, Will. Obviously, there's been a little bit of a meltdown in the funding ecosystem in the US, and that's certainly creating, shall we say, concerns for Ireland and Europe. What's your read on the funding landscape and how it's going to evolve over the next while?
Yeah, it's a complex question, and I'm naturally an optimist, so it's hard for me to talk pessimistically about the future of the financing. We invest in both in the US markets and also in Europe. So we've watched what has happened in the public markets trickle through to funding over the last 9 months. And I would say that the funding in the US has probably fallen off 20% in the last couple of quarters. We haven't really seen that in Europe yet, but I think we will see that in Europe. It's important to look at the data, but then it's also important to listen to the people who are deploying capital and what are they saying they're going to do. And I think there's two things that are happening. One, there's just a leak of confidence from the investors, the funds, in particular about how difficult it might be to raise a next fund. So they start naturally slowing down. And then I think private capital into those funds and directly into companies, again, confidence is just kind of leaking out of the system. Nothing's changed in terms of the opportunities that are there for founders or the enthusiasm of founders. So it's not like there's less founders coming forward. But I think that that confidence is kind of coming out of the system. And the other thing I think is 2021 was a bumper year. So comparing anything to it is, I'm not sure, it's a tricky read, but there's still a little bit of indigestion in the system of all of the investors who were investing so actively over that period. So I think they feel both they maybe don't need to be as active this year, and they're concerned about how long it might take to kind of raise the next fund. I think the institutions, back to your point about Enterprise Ireland and ISIF, they have been hugely supportive of all of the investors in this ecosystem. And again, with the new program, the Innovation Fund is great. So those institutions have the long-term thinking to be able to ride through these cycles, which is, I think, gives the confidence backbone to a lot of the investors, not just in Ireland, but across Europe, the European Investment Fund. But I think we're going to see a slowdown in all stages, a material slowdown in all stages across Europe over the next 6 months, because it's already happened. It's just not really reflected in the numbers yet.
Right, and why does it take time to feed through to the numbers, do you think?
Yeah, part of it is, deals that were done in Q2 were negotiated in Q1, and also some of the data is as a result of companies raising internal follow-on round from their own investors. So they decided not to go out to the external markets, raise from the inside investors. So it looks like things are normal, but they've actually just swapped capital, and that inside investor is probably not going to write the next round. So some of them have been trying to extend their runways. So there's lots of, as you dig down, 2 levels into the data, there's lots of weird dynamics happening, but the net of it is there's, quite a lot of confidence that's leaked out of the system.
Yeah, and that probably also means that investors are thinking about about reserving more capital for existing portfolio, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's also happening.
Okay. In terms of your portfolio companies, Will, what are you hearing from them in terms of the challenges that they face scaling?
Yeah, it's interesting listening to the entrepreneurs and the different challenges. I would say hiring was a topic that was in every meeting, 12 months ago. That seems to have largely gone away. I think on the capital side, depending on your stage, we invest in companies that are late stage US. Going public is not possible at the moment. So for them, liquidity is pushed out by 9+ months. For companies that have a debt dimension to them, so many companies are in lending or some sort of financing model like Jack, interest rate impacts on those businesses pretty much immediately. And then for a lot of late stage businesses, it's very hard to raise funding. And then I think the final one is on customers. The customer part of it is actually holding up pretty well. So I think you can see it even in the public markets, what are sales like, but headline sales are holding up well. Cycles are getting a little bit longer, and for software companies where it's based on a per seat model, there's less expansion of headcount in some of these organizations, so there's less expansion there and some contraction. But I would say overall on the sales dimension, that has held up pretty well. So it's really around the kind of capital part of the market is their biggest challenge that we see.
Yeah. Faye, turning to you, what's your read on the investment landscape? Is it different for companies that are focused on impact and sustainability, or is it very much the same picture?
Well, I would say it's not as doom and gloom, despite the fact that we're dealing with major issues, climate change, reeling from COVID and the war in Ukraine. And I think that's because those crises have actually illuminated some of the cracks in our economy and in our system and showed how important it is to be investing in sustainable and socially inclusive products. Whether we can actually develop them, innovate, and scale them fast enough to meet the need is probably the big question. So I would say for us as the impact sustainable investor, those crises can only just help us out because it also brings it to mainstream. We're seeing, of course, governments making major commitments. We already know about here in Ireland with the Climate Action Plan, but the European Green Deal is going to be fantastic, 10 trillion over the next 10 years. The SEC is finally starting to put out its climate disclosure regulations. Those will take some time, but the EU is ahead of the game. So for us here in Ireland, we're actually in a really nice place. We can benefit. I know SFDR is causing lots of headaches, particularly I think for this industry here at Avolon. I know for all those industries, you have to think about environmental disclosures, and it's a lot of extra work. But what it's actually doing is it's creating the infrastructure and the systems for some of the newer companies as well to think about how they're going to track their sustainable and environmental and social impacts over time, which is really going to be important as we see impact investing develop. I think those metrics were going to go on our balance sheets. We just don't know exactly how and when they're going to become material. So I guess for us, what we look at WakeUp Capital are really some of those innovations and companies that are thinking about how to develop, for example, transparency using blockchain, tracking impact and sustainability metrics in brand companies selling online. That's not the sexiest thing in the world, but we need it. So those are the kind of innovations we're seeing. But we're also seeing some more, I guess, revolutionary technologies taking off, and they're able to raise more money or get more R&D because the universities are thinking about sustainability, the governments are thinking about it, consumers obviously really care about it. Anybody under 30 is demanding it and nothing else. And that just helps drive demand across the board. And I think also big industry really knows that this is important. Not a board meeting goes by in big companies that isn't thinking about how they're going to evolve. And that can only mean more demand for innovative early stage companies, which of course, again, helps us out.
So a lot of money being spent and promised by the European Union. How does that trickle down to startups?
So from what I guess we're seeing, I think one of the programs I think is going to hopefully it's holding lots of promise is the European Innovation Council, which is a combination, I think, research and equity euros. Really helpful. I think it's replacing sort of Horizon 2020. And I'm sorry if I get those names wrong, but I think that's what that is. That's really going to help because it puts those companies through the rigorous process of thinking about their company over long term. Many of the technologies and solutions we look at are long-term plays, not exactly like some of the beautiful software that can replicate in its sleep, like over at Frontline. But that research monies really, really, really help. And I think Enterprise Ireland is doing fantastic work, really starting to even think about how to re-engineer some of their commercialization fund projects to include metrics around sustainability. Disruptive Technologies Fund is going to be really helpful. And then, of course, I think doing more to attract research money just at universities in general, because we need more talent. We need more people to understand how some of these technologies, whether they're mitigating or adapting to climate change, are going to work. And right now, we just don't have that breadth and depth the way we would say in aircraft leasing, which is of course why I live in Ireland, or else, for example, in technology and enterprise SaaS. Those are some of the areas, and my hope is we'll see more accelerators, more funds. We have Venture Wave here and others who are really giving, sort of, if you build it, they will come.
You mentioned a couple of times, quick mic switch, okay. I was building my own first business. We used to talk about the curse of the demo. You know, if you're on stage, it's guaranteed that the tech will break. So I was going to ask Faye. You mentioned some of the regulation that's coming. So why, I suppose, should all founders care about sustainability and have a sustainability plan? And separately, why should they develop sustainability solutions?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think there's often a question around the difference, but there's really a difference between ESG and impact. Everyone's talking about ESG all the time. ESG is just a way to screen a company's performance across environmental, social, governance. I see a lot of people nodding, so you probably all know this at this stage. So any company can and should have some kind of an ESG policy.
End of story. That's it. However, not every company is necessarily a sustainable innovation that's actually working towards evolving the way industries work, the way we process waste, for example, fashion, food, et cetera. Some companies are just going to be business as usual, but not necessarily contributing solution. I think the reality is we just don't have a choice, because we probably need 3 planet Earths to sustain the way that we've been living, at least for the last 60 years, using an extractive-based production economy. And it's just not going to work based on sort of needing to have it right now, today, at any cost. That's just not sustainable. And I think we all know it. I was actually, I hate to say this, thrilled to see really hot temperatures in Europe so that everyone realizes you don't have to just go to California or somewhere else to realize that we're really in trouble, and we are. So the Earth has no patience and is not going to wait. It's a question of how we respond, I suppose, to the urgency as governments, investors, entrepreneurs, and also just humans.
Thanks, Faye. And I should just mention that as part of Scale Ireland, we do have a sustainability working group, and some of those people are with us here today, and we're actually actively working with Enterprise Ireland to help companies, develop appropriate sustainability plans and so on. One final quick question for each of you, and I might start with you, Will. What advice do you have for startups that are looking to raise capital in the current climate, or just more broadly, how to survive the current climate?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is don't believe in listen to general advice like comes from people on panels. If you're in your if you're in your business, but I see like people taking on general advice, and it's dangerous to their business. It particularly happens now when there is a lack of confidence. Everybody thinks maybe I should cut costs, I should do all these things, and some of those businesses should do the exact opposite. So I would say my advice would be, if you're feeling great about where your business is, where you're going, customer demand, put the boot down. I think for anybody who's in another category, my advice would be create optionality on when you raise and how much you raise. The when is obvious. You just change how you bill customers or manage your costs. And the how much, like I'd be the last person to say raise less capital, because I actually think you need to win the race rather than be in the race. You need to raise a lot of capital typically. You can see it with our founders here. So. Yeah. So don't change the amount or your ambition, but maybe change the sequence of how you do that. And I think if you take some difficult decisions, maybe in early stages, and create optionality on when and how much, you might find yourself with just bigger upside down the line.
Yeah, Jack is certainly following that mantra. Faye, your thoughts, your advice for founders?
Well, particularly founders who are focused on sort of impact, sustainability, I think really think through, and I said this last week on a panel, so I'm repeating some material, but really think through what the world is going to look like in 10 years because of your solution, and how are we going to know it's different. So basically, you have to get down to those impact metrics. If you're really selling sustainability, you cannot BS it, because we will find out eventually, particularly with these new transparency disclosure rules. So think about if you're capturing carbon, how and how much, and how is it going to work, and how are you going to scale? If you're trying to make healthcare more accessible to this population of single moms in this part of the world, well, how are we going to know their lives have improved because of your technology? And document it and speak in a language that is understood by investors and by customers. Because if you just say, well, we just want to do good because we feel sad, that's not enough. You really need to get more technical and more specific, and also track the regulations that are coming down the pike in your particular area. If you're working in meat processing, find out how soon your customers or stakeholders actually are going to care about what you're doing. Just thinking that they think it's important right now is probably not true. If it's not affecting their bottom line, then it's probably not, it's not going to happen. I think you really need to be careful about that. So don't BS your impact or sustainability metrics. And yes, definitely raise as much money as you can. And I would love to say that there are enough opportunities for you to get money here in Ireland. I still think we need more funding focused on sustainable and impact businesses. And it's just not the case yet, particularly at the early stage. I've met many companies who've had to leave Ireland to go raise funds. There should be no reason why Ireland can't compete on a global scale when it comes to some of these technologies. Can't do everything. We should be able to do that.
Thanks very much, Faye. And some good advice there, by the way, for any business. Talk to your customers. Ask your customers what's important to them. Minister, can I ask you to respond to what you've heard from our investors?
So I really agree with the assessment that we just heard a moment ago regarding where we stand in the funding cycle. I think we need to be careful not to benchmark the availability of capital with what was an exceptional period over the last year or two, whether it was SPACs or some of the excesses of crypto assets. Some of that's just going to work itself out. And we just have to be careful that we don't evaluate the availability of capital against what could have been a period in which there were very high levels of capital available due to other things in the global economy, most noteworthy what was happening with interest rates across that period. All that being said, it then leads on to the question of what are we going to do to respond back to the funding needs that will be there. And what's so encouraging to hear is the customers and businesses have not changed. They want the capital, they want the investment, they want the support. But this is the reason why we have looked at the role of ISIF. It's the reason why we put such effort into this innovation equity fund for our economy with the help of EI, the European Investment Bank, other partners to get these in place. There is a terrible word in economic policy making called counter-cyclical, which says as one cycle changes, the state can step in. And while I didn't anticipate these being the reasons the cycle is changing, it is still changing. And we're working hard to make sure that for Irish entrepreneurs and for entrepreneurs who are based in Ireland, there are more options available to them. Take the feedback that we always need to do more and have more available. And we'll certainly see how the changes we've made work and what the demand is like for more of that in the future.
Thank you, Minister. So I think we're close to the end of our time, but I can probably just about squeeze in one or two questions from the audience. Mark Barry from Stripe, you're quick off the mark.
Hello, thank you, Minister, and to the panel for all your time.
There's actually a microphone in your...
So there is. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's great.
Hello.
It's actually more for the people online rather than...
Hello, everyone on Zoom. Thank you, Minister, for your time today and to the panel today. Very valuable discussion. Stripe recently surveyed ambitious startups in Ireland and across Europe. And one of the key findings actually was startups don't engage nearly enough with policymakers. So thank you actually today to Scale Ireland and to Avolon for hosting this session. More of this, please. Our survey of European startups also found a key finding is that they actually want more pro-innovation, smart regulation, like the rules that were introduced through open banking recently in Europe. So my question to you, Minister, is do you see an opportunity for Ireland as a hub for particular verticals like fintech, software as a service, climate tech, to become, through the development of smart regulation, to become a leader globally? You already highlighted Ireland has had huge success in the aviation finance sector and, of course, in pharmaceuticals. So there's no reason for us not to expect the same through some of the high growth sectors in the future.
Very much so. And I can't help but feel with audiences like this and the panels that we've heard that we're on our way towards progress in that. And if I look at it from a European level, what we are very, very much aware of within the European Union is if you were to look, and this is a dreadful phrase, you thought counter-cyclical is bad, but wait till you hear this. If you were to look at a map of unicorns across the world, a dreadful phrase, we know where they're geographically distributed. And we know per share of capita, per share of income, how Europe looks versus China and America. And that is very well understood within the European Union, which then has led into, as we heard a moment ago, the design of the COVID Recovery Fund, where we identified lower carbon, higher digital as being the two areas of change that the European economy needed to be able to maybe just preserve or hopefully increase living standards in the time ahead. And I believe that's the future of the euro. I believe it's the future of the EU, where we stand by those pivots, which then means for Ireland, we have to identify within that change, which I believe will happen in Europe, where do we stand? And it's like a kind of, I then go into the detail of this. This is kind of like a family wedding. Because you know, where you name a few people, you always offend everybody who you don't name. And I'm really aware of that here. But clearly, there are elements of what is happening in the application of digital technology to health, to climate, and to finance that Ireland has the potential to do really, really well in. And what I want to do, which I'm really trying to do with, I hope, some success, but we always have to do more, is figure out what are the policy tools that will help us get there. And I'm very optimistic about our ability to do it, not just because the policy instruments, though they would be nothing without the people. And we really do have the people. So we just need to keep on working to pull that together.
Thank you, Minister. I might have one more very quick question. And Bill, I'll ask you to be real quick, and equally I'll ask the Minister to respond quickly.
So can the Irish government help some of that European environmental money hit the startup sector here more quickly, especially as regards to things like energy independence and startups in that sector, also in the biotech sector, huge gains to be made. Can the government bring that cash in to Ireland?
Yes, from an Irish point of view, the European Recovery Fund as a share of our national income is a lot smaller than other economies, because other economies got hit worse by COVID than we did. But fortunately, we have within ourselves to respond back to that need through the domestic economic resources that we already have, which is why EI, the ISIF, and the other innovations that I've mentioned in our presentation this evening are about how we are trying to do it. And you will want us to do more and design what we are doing better, which is why events and engagement like we get from Scale Ireland matter.
Thank you, Minister. That's all we have time for, I'm afraid, in terms of questions. I'd like to just close by thanking the Minister for attending and contributing to our discussions with founders and investors today. This is a fairly busy time for the Minister, I know, so we're very fortunate to have been able to persuade him to join us. And I think the fact that he has joined us now, and indeed joined us online for a very similar event last year, is just an illustration of how much importance the government does place on this sector and the development of the sector. I'd also like to thank our founders, Jack, Orla, and Matthew, for joining us and for giving us their stories and their insights. Jack, by the way, you're one of the people who inflated those investment figures in the past while. But well done, and hopefully you'll continue to do so. And I'd also, of course, like to thank Will and Faye for their contributions. We're very grateful to Andy, Donal, and all of the Avolon team behind the scenes who have helped us to make this such a successful event. I'd also like to thank the Scale Ireland team, Niamh, Noel, Luke, Dave, Ronan, and Catherine for all their help in making this event run so smoothly. And also special thanks to Donohoe, Evan, Ivy, and Deirdre from our student working group who've helped out on the day and again made sure everything ran smoothly. And then finally, just a word for Sheila Hart. Where is Sheila? Up the back. Sheila is our head of operations and does a huge amount of work in the background, keeps us on track with everything from filings to an event like this. So a special word to Sheila for all her help and effort. And also thanks to my Olden, our event planner, who again has made sure that everything works smoothly. Thank you all for attending. And of course, thank you to Martina for an absolutely fantastic job as CEO of Scale Ireland. And I think Martina has one or two events to talk about.
This will be quick, but we do have some upcoming expert webinars that we do want to promote and will be of interest. One with leading tax experts, Anna Scali of KPMG and Tom Maguire, who's up there from Deloitte. And I'm going to repeat this because you might not believe it, but they will be giving free tax advice to our members. Okay, and secondly, Claire Marcy from Maples is also here today, and she will be giving an expert webinar to our members on the Digital Services Act, which will be coming down the road and close to you shortly. And finally, we do also hope at a later stage to have an expert session with Stripe. Thank you very much and hope you enjoy.